Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is July 26th, 2018. Well, here we are at a big day in the history of the Kindle Chronicles. It was 10 years ago today, July 26th, 2008, that I put the first episode up, TKC 1, with an interview with Baratunde Thurston. I was at the cottage in Ocean Park, Maine. I'm recording now in Omaha, Nebraska, at my sister-in-law's house, Deb's house, because we're here for the wedding of my niece, Sarah, and her fiancé, Nick. That's coming up on Saturday. My plan for this episode is to share with you some excerpts from past interviews over the past 10 years and to look back at where the Kindle was in 2008. That was less than a year after it was introduced in November of 2007. The evolution of the show and what we've talked about here has changed as the adoption of the Kindle has become more established. It has gone from a very gee whiz period, it was exciting enough for me. I thought, well, I'll start a podcast and try to do it every week. This was back when strangers would meet with each other at coffee shops just to show a Kindle to each other, because that was the only place that someone could actually see a Kindle. Gradually over time, the Kindle has become part of the way we read. A certain number of people read this way in genres. It varies. It's very high in the romance genre, science fiction genre, mystery genre, less in nonfiction and literary fiction. But the level of adoption for ebooks has pretty well stabilized. And as that happened, and it wasn't so much, boy, here's the latest thing, here's somebody else that's reading on a Kindle, and this is what they're doing. There was a natural shift to interviewing authors because everybody that gathers for this podcast, I think, is interested in books and loves reading and enjoys hearing from authors. So probably about a third of the shows now are author interviews, and sometimes I don't even mention the Kindle. I'll sometimes say, how are you reading books, or how many readers do you think are reading ebooks? But more, it's an opportunity to really understand what led an author to write a book and to tell enough about the book to give you an idea of whether or not it might be something that you'd like to read on your Kindle. My plan for this episode is to share with you some excerpts from some of the interviews that I've done in the past, and largely it's a chance for me to hear some of these voices again and pick the highlights. I think I'm going to start right out at the most exciting interviews that I've done in the past 10 years, and those were the two chances to sit down with Jeff Bezos, the CEO and founder of Amazon. It was actually the 4th anniversary of the show in 2012 that I first had a chance to talk with Jeff. I can't remember exactly how it came about, but my recollection is that the fellow that I was working with at the time from Amazon, Drew Herdner, reached out in an email in a surprising overture and saying, would you like to fly to Seattle and talk to Jeff? And I think I must have been talking about the fact that I've been doing the podcast for 4 years, and I think some people at Amazon were aware that I was doing it. I might have reached out and said, could I do an interview with Jeff? I just can't remember that part, but I do remember seeing an email saying, how would you like to come to Seattle and sit down and talk to Jeff Bezos? That was an email that I'll always remember. So I flew out and I stayed at a hotel within walking distance of Amazon's campus. And at the appointed time, I was in a conference room. Let's pick it up from 2012 as to what happened next. I began by asking what has surprised him the most about the Kindle's performance so far, 7 years after he and his team began the early design phase of its development.
The biggest surprise by far is how quickly it has grown. So when we did this, we were very optimistic that that Kindle would eventually be a success and that it would accelerate the adoption of ebooks. But what has actually happened so much faster than any reasonable person would have expected. So, today ebooks have become, a huge fraction of the books sold, and we wouldn't have anticipated that. That's a big surprise.
My next chance to talk with Jeff Bezos came 4 years after that in 2016. Again, I think it was right on July 26th, the anniversary of the first episode of the show. And I'm not sure how that 4-year cycle emerged. I think I knew I wasn't going to interview him every year, and I might have just tried again 4 years later, and sure enough, there was an opportunity to talk with him again. That does seem to be a kind of a expected cycle. I'm certainly going to try again in 2020. He's a lot more busy these days than he was back in 2012 and 2016, but perhaps there'll be a chance to interview him at the Boston HQ2 headquarters if Boston ends up being the city that Amazon chooses. I expect the decision on HQ2 is going to be announced fairly soon. Could happen before you hear this episode, because I think by the end of the summer we're going to know which of the 20 cities is chosen for the second Amazon headquarters. Of course, the first interview with Jeff Bezos has been pretty memorable and just kind of, I couldn't believe that it was actually happening. By the time it happened a second time, I won't say it had become routine, but it had a little different feel to it. I began by finding out how Jeff Bezos was reading books and periodicals this is in 2016.
Books almost exclusively on Kindle, and periodicals mostly on my tablet or sometimes my phone. So, but books I still like for kind of long form reading. I still really prefer my Kindle, and so I'm using Oasis today, and just totally loving it. Yeah. I'm amazed, by the way. I keep thinking when we shave another ounce off of Kindle like we've done with Oasis, I keep thinking, is it really going to matter to me? And it actually does matter to me. Yeah. I find that it's a huge difference that the device is a little lighter, and I don't get that hand fatigue. You kind of forget that you get hand fatigue when you're reading, but it does interrupt your reading. And here it just keeps me in the flow even that much more. So I'm loving it.
Over the past decade, I've had a chance to visit with other Amazon executives in addition to Jeff Bezos, and one of my favorites has been Russ Grandinetti. He's not involved in the Kindle area of the business anymore. He went off, I think he was heading the India operation for a while, and he's doing all kinds of things at Amazon, but not directly related to Kindle. In fact, I tried to reach out to him a little while ago for perhaps the 500th episode. I got a nice email back saying, congratulations on the milestone, but he's not the person to talk to about Kindle anymore. But back in the day, in the earlier years, he was the vice president for Kindle content, and he was, I've been in the corporate world, and I know that there's a lot of reasons not to be candid and kind of free in your discussion about the company, especially with the media. And I always thought that Russ was somebody that was confident enough in his grasp of the strategy of the company. I think he's probably fairly close to Jeff Bezos. He's in that upper management team. I just felt like when I asked him questions, I was getting fairly straight answers, and always thoughtful answers about Amazon's effect on the book industry and really what Amazon was trying to do. You'll notice in Jeff Bezos' comment earlier that his purpose was to accelerate the adoption of ebooks, and was surprised by how successful that was in the early days. Russ Grandinetti, I think, had a similar sense of driving efficiency in the book market, but so that the middleman between the author and the audience is gradually eliminated. Here's an excerpt from a conversation with Russ Grandinetti that I had in 2010.
I think we're reasonably well known for working hard to lower prices for customers. But if we think about authors as customers, making it easier and more feasible for an author to sustain a living writing is a great way to make our store better and to grow our business. And so taking some of the efficiency that digital book sales afford us and passing that efficiency back on to authors is a really great way to let digital publishing and digital book selling drive, a better customer experience.
I've always thought it was important that Amazon created Kindle Direct Publishing, its platform for enabling anyone to publish books on the Kindle at no cost to use the platform, and then very generous royalties up to 70%. That was launched the same day the Kindle was launched in November of 2007. And so the path of the Kindle itself and the path of Kindle Direct Publishing have been linked right from the start. This has unleashed a dramatic new era in self-publishing. I doubt anybody even remembers the term vanity press these days, that when you see the sophistication of self-published writers like Hugh Howey has been a leader in this movement, and others, there's obviously a new way to find readers other than spending years trying to find an agent and having the agent try to sell your book at a publisher in New York. Now people are publishing books, and some of them are becoming very successful. I've spoken with Hugh Howey a couple of times. He's a terrific guy. And then another person who personifies how important this kind of success can be, not only for an individual who can make a good living as an author, but just the quality of the books that we now have to choose from. And that's Andy Weir, who wrote the science fiction novel The Martian, which was turned into a terrific movie starring Matt Damon. I spoke with Andy Weir for the episode of the podcast which aired on January 23rd, 2015, and he told the story of how he had a career as a programmer. He was laid off by AOL, and he received enough of a severance payment that it gave him a chance to try his hand at writing a novel. So he wrote a novel, spent about 3 or 4 years trying to get it accepted by an agent and published in New York, had no success at all. So he went back to being a programmer. He figured he'd gotten that out of his system and he could go on with his life as a programmer and have a happy life. He didn't give up writing, though, and he started writing a story about an astronaut stranded on Mars, and he uploaded it as a serial novel on a blog and a website. He had no intention of publishing it any other way. He was just enjoying writing it. He was getting a lot of good reaction from readers that helped him to improve the accuracy of it as he was posting these chapters. And when he was done, this is what happened.
And I thought, like, okay, well, I'm done with that. Now I'm going to move on to my next serial or something. But I got people emailing me saying, like, hey, I like The Martian a lot, but I hate reading it on a web page. Can you make it into an e-reader format? And I'm like, sure. So I figure out how to do that, and I do it. And I post it to my site and say, like, here it is in EPUB format and Mobi format. Knock yourself out, free download, go to town. Some people are happy with that, but I got email from other people who said, oh, I love that it's available for free as an e-reader, but I'm not very technically savvy, and I don't know how to download a file from the internet and put it onto my e-reader. Can you just put it on Kindle so I can just get it through their architecture? I'm like, okay, so I figure out how to do that.
How long did it take you to figure out, from the time that was suggested to the time it was at the Kindle store? Any idea how long?
Oh, it was very fast. It's very easy to do. They have Kindle Direct Publishing is what it's called, KDP.
Right.
And I just registered on the site and then said, like, here's my book. And I'd already made it in EPUB format, which you just upload it that way. They convert it to their own proprietary format, but they read EPUB.
What did you do for the cover for that version?
I found a public domain image of Mars taken from orbit, and I just took that and put The Martian, Andy Weir, on it. That was it.
Okay, then what happened?
So I posted it to Kindle. Kindle, so they don't charge you anything, and there's no barriers to entry. They wait. I think there's like 24 to 48 hours after you initially post it before it starts to be available on their site, because they want to scan through it to make sure it's not a bunch of goat porn or something, right? And so, or if it is, that it's properly tagged. But other than that, they just post it up onto the site, and the way the money works is they get a cut of all your royalties, of the purchase price. They and you can set what that percentage is, but that affects what your minimum pricing is, and so on. I wanted the price. What I wanted at the time I posted it was I wanted the price to be zero. I just wanted this to be a way that people could easily get it onto their e-readers, but that's not allowed. You have to charge at least 99 cents. So that I would get a cool 30 cents per copy, and Amazon would get the other 69 cents, and that's as low as I could set the price. So I did that, and I told everybody, all right, You can read it on my website. You can download the e-reader from my website for free, or you can pay $1 to have Amazon put it on your e-reader for you.
I love that story. And I spoke with him before the movie came out, so I could tell that this was a book that was going to be having a big impact. And since then, it's continued to sell terrifically well. And he has a sequel, which I haven't read yet. That's on my list of things to do, is to read the second book and perhaps have him back on the show. Talking with Andy Weir and some of the other authors I spoke with early on, gradually it led me to come across other authors. I think publicists maybe started hearing about the podcast and offering the opportunity to interview authors, and I moved into this somewhat tentatively. I wasn't sure that this was what this podcast was about, but the more I've done it, the more I've enjoyed it. And these days, when I have a chance to interview an author, I really dig into it. I invariably read the book if there's time, and then I do a lot of research so that I've got some sense of how this particular book, the one that's being promoted, fits into the other work of the author. And I'd like to think we have good conversations, and the authors seem to enjoy it. And I think that anybody that says they have a few hundred listeners and they're all book lovers is a good place for an author to spend 20 minutes on Skype and doing a conversation. And I'm getting some connections within the publishing industry that bring more authors to my attention than I can handle. I'm quite partial to the Amazon publishing authors, and I think that the way that Amazon publishing is pricing ebooks and just the sensibility, a very high emphasis on translated work into English, everything about Amazon publishing pleases me, so I'm always eager to talk to Amazon publishing authors. I have also enjoyed talking to authors published traditionally, and one that I am glad I had a chance to talk to early on was Margaret Atwood, the Canadian author whose novel The Handmaid's Tale is now running as in its second season as a major HBO special. I find it really an amazing story to watch. Margaret Atwood came my way by way of Byliner, which was an innovative publishing operation for short stories that were all published as ebooks and as Kindle singles, and she had one titled I'm Starved for You, and I was able to reach out to her through the Byliner people to get an interview. As I listened to this interview, I was struck by quite a cheeky question that I asked her. This was at the time, this was in 2012, and Larry Kirschbaum was the head of Amazon Publishing, and he was pretty publicly trying to land big authors to sign with Amazon Publishing, and this was supposedly going to really scare the New York publishers to see something like this happen. And I thought that would be kind of fun if one of the big publishers, Patterson or somebody, went with Amazon Publishing. It never really happened, but at the time I thought, well, since Margaret Atwood is experienced in ebook publishing, maybe I could plant a seed. So this is how that exchange went. Larry Kirschbaum, who's the head of Amazon Publishing in New York, is trying to sign up major authors for digital and print book deals. It seems like traditional publishers are watching that with some alarm. And since you spend time imagining plausible futures and now you've got an exclusively ebook work, would you be a good prospect for him to approach on behalf of Amazon for a very newsworthy deal?
Well, he could do that, but on the other hand, I have a contract with the publisher. So you can't just go breaking your contract.
Is there a horizon after which your contract obligations are fulfilled that you'd consider
well, I think
approach?
You're being really optimistic because I'm quite old. Before this happens, I may be dead.
I see.
But ask somebody younger.
We'll return to some more excerpts from interviews in a moment, but I'd like to stop now and talk about one way that the podcast has shifted over these past 10 years. When I started out, I was a Amazon user, but I didn't really have any understanding of the company. I was interested in the Kindle. The Kindle is what brought me into this whole project. And it wasn't until I had a chance to visit with people at the company, especially when I had the chance to visit with Jeff Bezos, that I started getting drawn into the company itself as part of what I wanted to talk about on the show each week. The Kindle is still the thing which brought me here, and it continues to be an interest every time there's a new Kindle. Generally, I have a chance to see some of these in review copies beforehand. They don't have the big events anymore where there's a big splashy reveal and Jeff Bezos holds up a new Fire or a new Kindle at a stage somewhere. The incremental changes to the hardware now just don't lend themselves to that kind of grand hoopla. There's also a similar evolution in Apple's new products. I stood in line for the first iPhone at the Apple store in Cambridge, 2010. I think I got there about 3 in the morning and waited the whole next day and actually got the first iPhone at that store. It was crazy. You'd run in and the salespeople are jumping up and down as you run the gauntlet and you go in and get there. Well, the iPhone 10, was one of the bigger iPhone launches. There were no lines. There was no big special thing about it. And when you start out with a new product, there's a buzz which is possible, which just doesn't happen when you're refining it the way it's happening to the iPad and the Kindle. In any event, there was lots to be interested in about Amazon, and especially the innovation culture of the company. Certainly the financial success has been stunning, and I did buy some Amazon stock early on. For a while, I thought that I needed to not have any Amazon stock so that I could speak without any taint of self-interest on the show, and Darlene thought that was totally crazy, and I wished I had listened to her, because there was a period of a year or so when I sold all my Amazon stock, and then I came back probably 3-4 years ago and got back into it, which I'm very glad I did. It's looking very terrific at this point. So there was a kind of a financial interest. There was an interest in Jeff Bezos as a person, and there was an interest in the new products and the new innovations. Alexa, of course, was the big new thing lately, and I have talked a lot about Alexa on the show. It's a challenging part of the show because there's so much happening with the AI technology. Alexa really is getting smarter, and I am fairly active in using the equipment, especially using the Echo Show as a way to connect with my parents and the rest of the family. So I'm an active user, and anytime I think I can pass along something out of my own experience that would be helpful to you. I'm pretty sure there's a considerable overlap of people that are interested in the Kindle and people who are interested in Alexa, but I still see the main focus of the show being the Kindle devices, the reading, the ebooks, and books and authors, and then Amazon in kind of a general way. Another evolution of the show has happened around my attendance at South by Southwest Interactive each year. I think I've gone for the last 10 years. I had to miss a couple. That is a chance for me to branch out from the Kindle, from Amazon, and see what's happening in the rest of the tech world. This year, I was very interested in the blockchain technology. I heard from a couple of listeners that, okay, please don't turn this podcast into the blockchain podcast, and I know that I don't want to do that. And in fact, my own enthusiasms that get started at South by Southwest, they feel at the time that I'm going to be following them up because they hit so hard in that environment. I remember the year before last, there was a lot about chatbots, and I didn't know what a chatbot was, and I went to sessions, and I had on my to-do list to create a chatbot for the Kindle Chronicles, where I was going to have it possible through probably Facebook Messenger that if you, I'd give the chatbot a funny name, and then it would give answers to your questions. Well, after a few weeks went by, the idea of doing a chatbot mercifully disappeared back into the regular weekly routine of doing interviews. Similar thing is happening with blockchain. I thought that I was going to create a cryptocurrency named the Claire, and Mark Roberts, you're partly responsible for this because we had lunch when I was in the midst of my blockchain frenzy, and he was going to create a cryptocurrency for his church called the Carson. Neither one of us have followed up on that. So each year, something at South by Southwest will really trigger me and give me a chance to talk about it on that particular show. I do remain very interested in blockchain, and there's something I haven't talked about in the podcast yet. I might see if I can figure out how to get an interview into it, because it does have some overlap with reading material, especially journalism. The Denver Post has been one of the newspapers that's been so hard hit by the realities of the digital world, and I think they've fallen into the hands of a nefarious hedge fund that's been laying off half the newsroom. Some of the reporters and editors at the Denver Post have signed on with a new journalistic venture called the Colorado Sun, and it has some relation to blockchain technology through an entity called Civil. I have signed up with Civil. I think they're going to be issuing a currency, or a token they'll call it, in August 13th, and I'll be buying some. Somehow these tokens are used to bid up stories, to support the journalists who are doing this kind of work, and I'll be trying it just so that I can learn how blockchain technology might be some kind of an answer for the world of journalism. So that's an example of how I think this does surface, and will probably cycle back into the content of the show from time to time. I've also done some thinking about just the shape of the show. That has evolved over the years. The interviews I thought were just going to be talks with people to tell me what was on their Kindles, and that's certainly changed to wide-ranging interviews. My sense, just informally hearing from you in emails, I always hear that the tech tips are valuable, and I always hear that the interviews are of interest. I seldom hear anybody say, boy, the news, I love it when you talk about the news. And I've sort of felt like I should talk about the news. I'm a podcast, I talk about Amazon, I talk about the Kindle, and if there's some kind of a new Kindle, or if Amazon has done something that's in the news, that I should be talking about it. And frankly, I get kind of tired of that felt obligation. So lately I'm just talking about items of news that interest me, and I think that feels a little fresher and less going through the motions. I could imagine as this goes forward that there might be less news, less talking about things that lots of other people are talking about. That's the thing that what can I bring value to in this show? So I see that maybe receding. Tech tips, I think that anytime I can pass along something about how to use your Kindle, how to use your Fire, occasionally how to use your Alexa, out of my own experience, talk about it in a personal way, not just the how to do it, but why to do it, and what are the benefits of this particular technology interface. And then I get a lot of help from you on tech tips that I love to pass along. Content, I think that's an area, it's a part of the show to point you in directions where you might find things. I've very much realized that any one person's taste in books is very personal, and just because I like a book doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth inflicting on the listeners of the show, except very briefly, maybe just sort of in passing. Comments, I'd like to see more comments, and if you're someone that's listened to the show for a long time and you thought, gee, I ought to drop Len an email and tell him about this, I'd really love to hear from you. I love hearing from the regulars, and I've got people that have constantly given me ideas for interviews and links to articles, and that's a very valuable part of this experience, is to be connected to people over time and around the world. Shimon shot in Poland, and Oleg Stubblehouse in the UK and London, Jean Rampel in Paris, Izzy in Australia, And then the regulars here in the U.S., Garrett Riley and Brett McNeil, high school friends that both discovered they were enjoying the same podcast. And I've had a chance to meet both of them and have them on the show. Guven Vidovine, I've met up in Michigan. And different people that I've had a chance to correspond with. Katie Loss, and of course Eric, her son, with the circumnavigation around the world. And we talked to him a couple of times. It's a rich and odd community in that so many of you, I've never heard your voice, I've never seen you. It's wonderful when there's the chance to cross over into real space and you say, oh, okay, that's what you're like in person, and those are very fun to do. But it's a very rich set of connections which has developed from doing this show. If you've got a comment and you'd like to send it to me, the easiest way to do it is just drop it to podchronicles@gmail.com. And sometimes I don't get to them the week that they show up, but I eventually will batch them, and that's something I'd like to do a little bit more on. If you've got any other ideas on how the show could morph in the next 10 years, and I'd be glad to hear it. What I like in other people's podcasts are when I'm hearing something authentic, someone is thinking out loud about something that I'm interested in. It's not so much an NPR style. It's somebody speaking into a microphone on a regular basis about things that I'm interested in listening to them. Maybe I like the sound of their voice. Maybe I like different connections with their personal life. And that, I think, seems to me a way a podcast community grows in kind of an organic way. I'd like to share two more excerpts of interviews with you. These are special to me because they're two very highly regarded contemporary poets who I had a chance to talk to. They're both gone now since I did these interviews. The first is John Ashbery, and the second is Donald Hall. I reached John Ashbery at his apartment in New York, and I was asking him why he loves to write poetry.
I love the feeling that I may have written something that will touch base with a potential reader, but I don't know what that is or who that person might be. These are things, of course, that can't really be known and that all writers face. But when I do get a positive reaction from a reader about a poem or a line, it's very rewarding because it makes me feel I haven't been barking up the wrong tree all these years. Although I have a line of poetry somewhere that says, "Show me the right tree and I'll bark up it."
And here is Donald Hall recalling another legendary contemporary poet, Frank O'Hara, who was a great friend of his at Harvard.
Frank O'Hara wasn't on the magazine, but I knew him because he was in the same dorm I was in. He was about the funniest man I ever met. And he was sharp and sarcastic often, but he had a wonderful manner with it. And he gave the best parties at Harvard. I went to them, and that was a happy time together.
There were a lot of happy times in the early days of the Kindle, showing them off to people. And here's my first guest, Baratunde Thurston, talking about a setting at a restaurant. And you can hear the excitement in his voice and imagine the scene.
Up in Lenox, Mass, I had an audience of 7 people. It was like 3 different lunch parties. And they all were like, "Oh, what's that? And how much does it cost? And where do you get the books from? And why don't you do this? And blah, 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 blah." And half of them, I'm sure, will be converted ultimately. Amazon owes me, Jeff Bezos actually owes me a call.
And finally, those of you who called in with comments on the audio line, thanks very much.
Hello, Len. James McQuivey here, longtime listener and occasional guest. Congratulations on 10 years since the first episode. You had the foresight to recognize that Kindle was going to change everything in the first year of its existence, and it indeed has. What it has changed for the industry, you and I have discussed. What it has changed for me personally, I think is very interesting. Number one, it gave me the new expectation that I should have access to books all the time. There was a time when if you wanted to read a book, you had to mentally keep track of it. Where was it? Did you bring it with you on this particular journey, or did you leave it at home? You had to keep track of it. You had to keep it dry. You had to keep it whatever. And that's all fine, and it's amazing when you consider that 500 years ago, that luxury would have been beyond the vast majority of people. But for me, once I got Kindled, my expectation shifted completely. I suddenly expected to be able to read wherever I was, and I basically went through every single Kindle form factor trying to find the one that I could pocket. And I found many that I could, and then, of course, eventually progressed to just relying on my phone when necessary as phones got better and easier to read on. Well, all of this has ironically led me away from the Kindle book and straight to Audible, because nothing is more permanently accessible than being able to listen to books wherever I am. Now, when I make the decision of when I'm going to buy a book, I have to think, when will I be most likely to want this content? When I'm running? When I'm waiting in line to get on a plane? All of the places that I'm most likely to listen to a book. Or when I want to sit down and studiously consider words at length. With that in mind, that tells you a little bit about the Kindle books that I am most likely to have been affected by. Early in my Kindle journey, I was reading books like The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, something I had intended to read forever, but at 806 pages was just not something I could easily carry around with me, even on a long flight. So Kindle unlocked books like that for me, and I went through all of Follett's books that I could, and others like that. But in more recent years, it has been books that I know I wanted to read and not listen to. Books like Behave by Robert Sapolsky. This book has absolutely changed my understanding of human biology, how it relates to psychology. It's been useful to me in my work, yes, but really, really useful to me in just my own self-understanding. And that was a book I had to read. In fact, this is a book that I have read on a Kindle, have also listened to on audiobook, and have a hard copy of, so that I can go back, first of all, proudly show it on my shelf, and then go back and look up the specific notes that are most likely to haunt me months after I've actually read the book. So Kindle has unlocked my expectation about how accessible books should be to me. And that has unlocked my use of Audible, and even has brought me back to paper books when necessary. The whole point is it's made me a more literate me, and I'm grateful for that. And it is part of why I was so early on convinced that this, although it would be disruptive to the book industry itself in the short run, in the long run would be good for literacy.
Hi, Len. Dan Campbell calling about your question on the 10-year anniversary coming up. The questions, the Kindle has changed the way I read. I find the ease of getting books and samples have made it much easier to get to books. Don't have to wait to get to the local bookstore. So that's helped tremendously. I used to read 4 or 5 books a year, and with the Kindle I usually read about 15 or 20 every year. Regarding question 2, the book in the past decade, my favorite book of the past many, many years is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I've read it, I think, 3 times now. Every few years I pick it up and get through it. I found it a fascinating book, Pillars of the Earth. Your last question, changes. The only thing I like to see maybe is color possibly with the Kindle, and they have the Audible with the new one, but not Whisper Sync. So until it has Whisper Sync, I still have my Kindle Voyage. So that's my answer to your 3 questions. I've been listening now, I guess, about 3 years, and I wish you another 10 years at least.
Hey, Len, it's Garrett Riley wishing you and the Kindle Chronicles a very happy 10th anniversary. It's been an amazing 10 years, Len. It really has. I've been with you nearly from the beginning. One of the best memories of my life was when I went with you to see the original Kindle Paperwhite being unveiled in Santa Monica. That was so cool. I will remember that till the day that I die. That's just one of the many amazing memories I have. I've met you in person a couple times. I've met Darlene in person. Her quilts are amazing and are works of art, by the way. I've seen the grandfather clock. But yeah, it's been incredible to be one of your listeners, and I wish you all the best, and here's to at least another 10 years and beyond.
Len, John Sullivan here. Happy anniversary. The Kindle has changed the way I read in the past 10 years by allowing me to read more often and with less difficulties. Highlighting and notes have also increased my retention, helped, of course, by the Readwise app. The book most influenced on me was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, read in paper form with a men's group at church. We could have discussed that thing for 10 years. Changes I would like to see in digital reading, I will answer in the negative form. I do not want to see an abandonment of the e-ink format, as the blue light does indeed disturb my sleep. Thanks again, and happy anniversary.
Hello, Lynn. This is Mark Roberts in Dallas, Texas. Boy, I can't believe you're done 10 years of shows. It's been great, and you've had so much influence on so many people with the amazing podcast that you do. It caused me to start a magazine for Kindle and even write a book. So I can't thank you enough. I think as we look forward to the next 10 years, I'm hoping for a couple of things. First, that the folks at Amazon, especially Jeff Bezos, figure out how important you are and put you on some kind of Kindle advisory council, because you know everything there is to know about the Kindle, and they need you up there helping them. Secondly, I'm hoping we have an ending of weather forecast on the Kindle Chronicles, because listening to you saying you're sitting by the ocean on a cool, breezy day in Maine when it's 106 here in Dallas is pretty painful. Finally, I think we're all hoping for better Kindle screens. I would love a Paperwhite screen that also uses color, and I would really like a foldable screen so that I could have a big Kindle, but then I can just fold it up and put it in my pocket. That would really, really be nice. I end up reading on my iPhone SE, which has a pretty tiny phone, because it's available. It's in my pocket, and I've got a moment to read, so I pull that out. I don't go track down my iPad or go read online on a laptop just because it has a bigger screen. I just make do with the small screen of the phone. So if they could make that screen fold and then I could unfold it and have a big screen with some color on it, that would be amazing. Thanks again for all that you do. You do a tremendous job with the Kindle Chronicles. I look forward to it every week. Happy anniversary, Lynn.
Hi, Lynn. This is your friend Kes Woodward in Fairbanks, Alaska. I just want to congratulate you on the 10-year anniversary of your podcast and say again how incredibly impressed I am by its consistent quality. It's been a highlight for me of every week without fail for 10 years. Perhaps surprisingly, I think the main way the Kindle has changed my reading is through the ability it affords to download free samples of books. That's encouraged me to check out and to often purchase and continue to read any number of things I wouldn't have otherwise. Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, is one of the books that most changed the way I look at the world in the last 10 years. And as you know, I find technical improvements in digital reading interesting, but not really important. I was just as happy reading good books on my Palm Pilot more than 15 years ago as I am reading on my Kindle today. I'm mostly grateful for the availability of more and more content, eager to see that continue, and for it to be affordable. Thanks, Lynn.
That's it for this anniversary show, the 10th anniversary digital party online celebration of what we've done in the past decade. It's been fun, and I want to thank everyone who has helped make this possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your tips, your ideas. Thank you for getting together with me in person when I'm in your town. And it's made my life at a certain age here, I'll be 68 next month, very full in ways that I never could have anticipated when I first turned on that microphone 10 years ago today at Ocean Park and started talking about the Kindle on the Kindle Chronicles. My guest next week will be Jim Jones. He is here in Omaha. He's retiring from teaching at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. He's been a guest before, and whenever I'm in town, we get together at a place called Scooters and talk ebooks and Amazon, and it'll be fun to connect with him on next week's show. One person I didn't have a chance to have audio from the show today is Darlene, my wife. Her support in this has been important and perhaps a little bit long-suffering, because I have been so obsessive about doing the show every week that there have been times on vacations and family events like this, like a wedding in Omaha, where I've spent most of the day at her sister's upstairs living room working on the show. There wasn't any preparations that I was supposed to be doing that I wasn't able to, but I am going to finish this up tonight and have it posted early in the morning so that I can be a full member of the wedding party here to celebrate this great event. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Omaha, Nebraska. Thanks very much for listening. Have a great day. Bye.